Hello, everyone. Very sorry about that. We were facing some slight technical difficulties. Hello, and welcome to the Power Platform Automation session on this lovely day. I have a very exciting 45 minutes planned ahead for us. So, first off, a huge thanks to all the sponsors without whom this would not be possible. And without further ado, this is Shidin Haridas here. I am a Microsoft Power Platform developer slash consultant, and I've been working with business applications since CRM 2011. Please feel free to connect with me on any platform you can find me on. I've been fortunate enough to engage with fellow enthusiasts over social media over the years, and I do believe in passing it on. I currently work as a senior Dynamics consultant for a Microsoft partner based in Ireland named Aspira. That's my official email at the top. There would be dedicated Q&A time towards the end of the session where I'll be taking all the questions. But in case you do want to follow up with me, please feel free to reach out to me. And right, before we get started, I want to set the expectations right. The only prerequisites this session require are the following, which is that you are familiar with what the low code, no code development is, and you have some familiarity with Microsoft's offering, also known as the Power Platform, and you're kind of familiar with what Power Automate is, which was formerly known as Microsoft Flow. And since we all know how much Microsoft loves renaming their products, let's align on some terminology before I dive in. Uh, First thing, there are three kinds of Power Apps: Canvas apps, model-driven apps, and Power Apps portals. This session is mostly focused on the model-driven apps, but some of the concepts are still relevant for Canvas Power Apps and Power Apps portals as well. When I say CDS or the Common Data Service, I'm now talking to the renamed Dataverse, which is the underlying common data model on which all the apps are built. Now, if you're someone who's been working with Canvas Power Apps for a long time, you could have chosen to not use the CDS at all. But this session heavily focuses on the Common Data Service. And when I say Dynamics 365, I'm just referring to the old product known as Customer Relationship Management, also known as Customer Engagement. So effectively, this is nothing but it's just the Dataverse plus some specialized first-party applications from Microsoft. Right, and these would be the various topics I hope to cover today. First one is the Power Automate flows. Then I would be going into classic workflows, which were the common ones. And then I would talk about actions, followed by plugins, business rules, and end up with business process flows. So Power Automate flows, now they are aptly the poster child of Power Platform automation, and a lot of the people are familiar with Power Platform just because of flows. And as you know, this is a core pillar of the Power Platform, and I would call it a separate product in itself. And the last time I checked, there were over 470 plus connectors, which means you're pretty much covered for every major cloud provider out there and service which you can connect to. And the designer is easy, it's friendly to use. And nowadays, Microsoft is heavily focusing on intelligent automation, which is why we have all these RPA capabilities coming in. Right, I will kick off with this. So before I jump into the Power Automate demo, I just want to give an overview of a system I built out. Right, I'm looking at model-driven apps, and let's say I'm focused on an app known as Customer Service Hub, and all I'm using it is to track all the cases, let's say, I will face during Scottish Summit. So as you know, right now, my session kicked off late. So let's say I do say this as kick off late, right? Say I'm creating a new incident or a case, and once I save this, so what I have done in the backend is I do have a flow. And what the flow does is it just notifies me every time a new case is created. It sends me a notification on my mobile, the mobile app, as well as I have my Teams chat open here. It would send me a Teams card as well. So to look at the flow mate, let me just go into my make.powerapps.com, which is my designer studio. And if you look at the solutions I do have a solution known as Scottish Summit. And let me just filter based on flow. So that's the flow there. And I actually have that open. So if I look at this flow, my example is essentially, it's a very simple example. I have the trigger set to whenever a row is added, modified, or deleted. And I'm creating a message, which basically gets the case ID and the title. And I get who created the case owner, which in this case is me. and I'm sending a push notification, as well as I'm posting it onto Teams. So if you see here, I see a new message came from the flow bot saying a new case has been created. So that's all my flow did. And as you can see, an event which started in Dataverse or CDS, the Common Data Service, immediately came to me as a notification on Teams. So that's what the beauty of Flow is. Just with 5 drag and drop blocks, I was able to integrate 2 different services, which is the Common Data Service and Teams. Again, I'm not going into details on Power Automate. There are too many sessions. There are other sessions in the summit which focus on that. So before Flow was even a thing, right? Which came only in the last few ways, we still had automation. And that's what we used to call as workflows, or as the community calls the classic workflows. Now, they are again graphical user interface. So you can actually you don't have to write code effectively for this. And they are still an alternative to Power Automate. But the main striking difference between Power Automate and Flows is that Power Automate is capable of connecting to, as I said, 470 plus different connectors, whereas the workflows, they are kind of limited in the scope that whatever operations they do is within the common data service or Dataverse. So it's mostly confined to creating, updating, delete, and some specialized operations. And also one difference is you could kick off workflows pretty much synchronous or asynchronous, and they are tied to a single table or entity, which I would show. But in addition, you could always write code. This was provided by Microsoft through their SDK or the software development kit. So you could always extend this. So let me jump into the demo on that one. So what I'm trying to achieve here is, as I said, on my case, right? Say a customer creates a case, and as I'm engaging with him, maybe the customer wants to change his GDPR preference while I'm on the case itself. So maybe when I change this and I ask his new preference, which might be a no or yes, and as I save this record, I want it to be synced back to the contact record. So if I open the contact record, which I already have open, I have a toggle field there. So effectively, all I'm trying to do is every time something happens on the case, I have the ability to update this field as well. Now, if I were to use a workflow to do this, this is how it would go. I would actually start off from my solution. And currently, there's a small one. There is no way to create a classic workflow from here. So I need to click on and switch to the classic view. And there I would see my processes. So I would have to kick off with a new process. That's the old world terminology for every automation aspect that is available. It's just called a process. And once I kick off a process, I'm presented with a window which shows what kind of process am I looking for. So while that loads there, uh, I actually have my process anyway. So this is what my process looks like. So if I'm taking it step by step, at the very first step itself, I need to specify what is the table this is linked to. And as I said, the terminology still hasn't come all the way, which is why we are saying entity. And I have to say the category is a workflow. And if I say I have this unchecked, which means this is not running in the background, which means this is a synchronous flow. The minute it gets triggered, it's going to operate. It's not going to wait, as in the case of Power Automate. The scope field pretty much similar to what Power Automate offers. And this is where I define my trigger. So here I say, start this process when a particular field changes. And that field, I have said that's the change GDPR preference toggle on the case record. So effectively, when this field change, just this entire process kicks off. And what I'm trying to do is, I think I'll just show that in action really here. So let's say, so for this record right now, the customer has the GDPR opt-out set to no. Let's say as part of a case, and when I'm engaging with him, he wants to change it and he wants to opt out. So the minute I say I need to opt out, this workflow kicks in because it's a real-time workflow. And once I refresh it, I see that the value has changed. So what is happening in the backend is I am changing some conditions, which says if the change GDPR preference field equals yes, then I'm saying if the field value equals no, then update this on the contact record to no, or the other way around. So this is how workflows work. So this area towards the end is what we call the designer area. And pretty much like Power Automate, I get to add steps, I get to add conditions, and slightly bit more operations are possible as well. So currently this workflow is activated. So just like Flow, every time I make a change, I need to activate the workflow, publish it, only then it gets into effect. So while I'm waiting for that to deactivate, it takes a good minute for me to deactivate it. Let me just jump back. Okay, yeah. Now it's deactivated. And as you can see, now I have more options. So let's say in this case, I want to, this is the first operation where I say the opt-out is no. And I have a series of steps which I can do. And as I said, this is again confined to platform operations like create, update, assign, send email, and things. So this you don't really get an operation like send a message to Teams. That's why I said that there is no way you could integrate it with an external system out of the box. You could of course write your custom code. As you can see, there are Microsoft provided project service methods which I could use, but that's beyond the topic right now. The idea is just to introduce you to workflows, which is the other alternative we have to Power Automate flows. Jumping back to my slides. Now, one of the reasons is the power workflows were very powerful, but they also had some limitations. One of which was every time we couldn't just copy paste blocks of steps into other steps. We always had to recreate it. And pretty soon what happened is the workflows became really complex. We were talking about 20 to 30 different steps. So even to understand what the workflow did, it was taking time. So then Microsoft introduced the concept of a child workflow, just like we have Power Automate flows, which call each other. And Microsoft also introduced a new feature known as actions. So in short, an action can be thought of like a message, like create, retrieve, update, or delete. But say I create a new message and I call it send invoice, right? So what happens in the backend is Microsoft creates a separate special request known as send invoice, and I could call it from my workflow. I could call it from any external systems which are integrated to the system, or I could call it from JavaScript. So the actions, all they do is they just execute a specific piece of logic, and that's it. They don't really have any triggers themselves, but they kind of became the reusable modular automation blocks which we could use throughout the system. Now, again, this can be further extended. You could create your own action steps using the SDK. Now, if I have to jump into this one, and I do have some actions created. Okay, so this is my action. And again, the designer is very similar to workflow. It again starts with the same thing. It just asks for what the category is, and it's tied to a single entity. But you could always have an action which is not tied to an entity, and we call such ones a global action. The main difference from a workflow here is we don't really have to specify the trigger for it, because as I said, an action is not capable of triggering itself. It has to be invoked from somewhere else in the system. So, but you can also pass arguments into the action. So you could pass input parameters, which again, there are some types, which are basically the common ones: string, field, date, decimal, money fields. And you could always pass out output parameters. So in case this action successfully executes, I could always pass out a success message back to the part of the system which calls it. So I just rewrote the action, which pretty much does the same thing as my workflow. It just takes in a parameter, which is a Boolean one, a yes or no field. And if it says if the parameter is yes, it's going to update the contact records GDPR to yes, and the other way around. So now if I have to rewrite this workflow to just use the action, so instead of 1, 2, and this checks, all I do is I just have to just invoke the action, and it will be a simple one. So my workflow just checks the basic guard conditions, and then it just calls the action. And to call an action from a workflow, instead of create, we have a perform action step. And once you choose that, you get a drop down showing what are all the different actions which are available in the system. Now, again, it's taking a minute because there are quite a few actions. So from here, I need to pick which one should I invoke. And as you can see, this action has a very specific name. So that's the one I should be calling there. Right. And now going to plugins. So actions and workflows were great, but one thing we soon found was, the more complex logic it had to do, we just couldn't do it within steps. You were getting into the realm of 50 to 60 different workflow steps which we're doing. And again, you could always do this through the code approach, and that is what Microsoft calls plugins. Now we use .NET code and we use the software development kit to do this. And so essentially, it starts off with a developer building an assembly in Visual Studio or some kind of development environment, and we deploy it to the Microsoft database cloud or the server, and then we have to subscribe events to this. Now, the one thing which plugins can do, which no other automation elements can do, is it offers advanced capabilities. So let's say a field value is changing from X to Y. In a plugin, I can get the value of both. I can get what was the previous value as well as the new value, and I could always check. Now, these kind of things become very useful in case of state-driven systems where I need to know what was the previous state, and based on that and the new state, I need my system to behave in a separate way. But this is definitely a code approach. I'm not going to show the code, but I will show the tooling. So this is the tooling from Microsoft. We call it the plugin registration tool. So effectively, and as you can see here, there are a lot of assemblies. These are all the ones from Microsoft itself, which kind of ties the entire system around. But for our purpose, I have created an assembly known as the Scottish Summit 2021 assembly. I have a plugin, and the plugin is essentially my action or something like an action. And what it does is it auto names, right? Now, I don't really specify what it auto names. As I said, it's just an event, but then I need to subscribe different steps to it. So let's say I'm going to say, and when the message, so I'm saying when I create an account, I want this plugin to be triggered. And again, there are quite a few operations. So I could call it as the person who created it, or I could, run it in some other user's context. I can have different pipeline stage line execution, which means should I run this before the record is created, or should I run it after the record is created? Now, if it's after the record, should it run in an async mode or should it run in a synchronous mode? And there's also capabilities where I can pass additional parameters into the step. So as you can see, this offers us full granular control over an operation which happens in Dynamics, which is currently not possible with Power Automate or Workflow or any of the GUI-based editors, right? So I will leave it at that and not get too deep into it. Right. The next one is a straightforward one. It's called business rules, and they were kind of the replacement to scripts, as in front-end scripts. So in case I want to hide or show fields, I want to calculate some values on the fly. So instead of writing automation for it, because an automation's trigger point is always when the record is created, it has to be something which happens in the database. But business rules, they don't really need anything to happen in the database. It's just at the user interface level. And most of the business rules, they only apply to model-driven apps, but there are some specific scenarios which we can extend to Canvas apps as well. So if you noticed what I was showing before, I have this field, the change GDPR preference, and as and when I toggle it, the second field is being hidden. So this is an example of a business rule. And to create a business rule, it's slightly different. We have to start with the table because it's tied to the table. So I go to my case, and within the table, I would have a section known as business rules. And I do have, this is my business rule. So when I have it open, so again, here I specify, it's again a condition-based action. So my first condition, it just says, if the change GDPR preference field equals yes, then I'm showing that field. And if it equals no, then I'm hiding this field. So again, you could build multi-conditional ones. You could make it way more complex as you want, provided it is supported by the designer. And one thing to remember is there is a concept known as scope when we have business rules. So you define it here. So the scope effectively means this. So this business rule, should it only run on a specific form? So in my case, let's say I could choose to have it only run on this particular form. or it's saying I'm going to run it on all the forms. So tomorrow, if I create a new form, the same logic is going to run on that form as well. Or I could have choose to have it on the entity level. Now, choosing it at the entity level is the way you can see this behavior on Canvas apps as well. But as I said, not all actions make sense in Canvas apps. Like this one, showing or hiding fields on a Canvas app doesn't make sense because Canvas app controls don't render the same way as in model-driven apps. But in case, say, I do have another field which sets the field value based on this. So if the GDPR preference is yes, maybe I'm setting a field value to GDPR. So if in case of such a business rule which actually sets the value and the scope is entity, and I'm working with these tables in Canvas Power Apps as well, I would be able to get these validation there as well. So that's the entire idea of business rules, and they're insanely helpful when you have all these rules which keep changing. And as I said, these get for the entity ones, they're mostly of scope when you commit to the database, as in when the save happens or when a record is modified. Okay. And the last one is actually business process flows. Now, these are a bit different from all the other ones in the fact that these are not really something for automation. They are more of a virtual guide. So let's say you have a form which goes through multiple stages. And in the screenshots seen here, as you can see, I have a case form which goes through 3 different stages. So that's the business process flow up there. So it just provides a streamlined user experience, especially when it comes to data entry. So in case you have a process or form which needs 100 fields to be captured, but you don't need all the fields up front. At every stage, there's only a specific set of fields you need. So business process flow kind of help with that. But where it's really useful is at every stage, you can the business process flow can trigger a workflow, it can trigger an action or a Power Automate flow, as in when it enters a stage and leaves a stage. So it kind of brings the entire automation element together. So if I jump back to my case form, as you can see, this is the business process flow. And you see, I'm at the first stage, which is identify, and Microsoft automatically tracks how much time your record is in each state. So the minute you create a record, Microsoft automatically creates a business process flow record in the backend, and it starts tracking. So maybe I go to the next stage, and at the next stage, the only action I need to do it, I need to make sure whether it has to be assigned to others. So and as you can see, it immediately Microsoft on the back end, they started tracking how many minutes this has been there. This kind of becomes useful for our downwards reporting. And to see how this looks under the hood, I need to go back to my processes. And that's the one, that's the font to case process. Now this is more of a easier to understand drag and drop kind of thing. So essentially I have each stage what you see on the case, which is identify, research, and resolve. So I have the same 3 stages here, identify, research, and resolve. And in the first, okay, we were the research stage. And as you can see, it just says, are there similar cases? If so, assign to others. I could always add an additional stage, here and call it whatever I want, or I could have a logic which says, and I could add it here. And I'm saying maybe my logic says, if this case priority equals high, right? Then I can actually branch it and say, then only it needs to go into the research. If not, if it's a low priority one, we could directly go and it could directly go to the result stage. And maybe in the research stage, I need to do more automation. Let's say I need to call a flow, which is possible, and I need to see all the flows. So I could call the first one I created. So at the research stage, I could call my notification flow and change it accordingly so that they know when I enter the stage, it needs to trigger off a notification. And I could also call my workflows if I have any created. And yeah, I do have one. So I could call my workflow as here, and I can again specify the trigger. Is it when I enter the stage or is it when I exit the stage? So business process flows kind of provide a streamlined experience, and you just connect the dots really here using all the other automation elements built in. So to sum it up all together, my decision tree, now again, this is not anything from Microsoft. This is just my personal, the way I would do things if somebody asked me to do something or an automation element is the first question, what we are trying to do. Is it just some simple form or data validation? If the answer is yes, then yeah, business rules might be the answer. In case we're not trying to do a simple form or a data validation, then the next question, does this automation or this process, does it need to connect to external services? If yes, Power Automate is the winner there. As you know, there's 470 plus connectors it can actually connect to. And if no, next question, is this a real-time process? Does it have to be processed right now and then, or else the operation has to roll back? If it's no, again, it could be done in Power Automate, it could be done in workflows, or it could be done in plugins. Now, again, there's a huge topic of whether we should be using Power Automate versus workflows for async processes. I'm not getting into that debate, but it comes to your personal preference and how you're building out your system. But the next question would be, do you need advanced capabilities? And in case you do need you don't need advanced capabilities, then workflow would be good for you. Or if you need the advanced capabilities, as I said, using the plugins, I need to know when to trigger it. I need to know what was the previous value before I make a decision, yada, yada, yada. Plugins are the one. And I just have a scale, just saying which is, business rules, Power Automate, they kind of fall at the lower end of the spectrum in the low code, no code. And if you are actually having to deal with plugins, that is purely mostly developer realm. Yeah, that is me really. And I, uh, if there are any questions and answers, if there are any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. Or if you want me to revisit any of the slides or take a look at anything, we have a few minutes for that as well.